This learning path is all about using Django for web application development with the help of prompt engineering with generative AI tools. Before we get started using generative AI assistants to build web applications with Django, let's first understand what the Django framework is all about. You need to have a big picture overview before you start getting hands on. So, what exactly is Django? It's a Python web framework that simplifies and streamlines the development of web applications by providing a robust set of tools and features. Django makes web application development very simple and intuitive thanks to its structure and the number of libraries and apps that it offers built in. Django allows you to build web applications using the model view controller or the MVC architectural pattern, and this encourages rapid development and clean and maintainable code. If you've worked with building user interfaces before, you know that the MVC design pattern is the standard that you use. This allows for clean separation of components that interact with data stored in a database, components that the user sees and interacts with, and components that fire up the two. Just a heads up that in Django, the MVC design pattern is referred to as MTV, Model Template View. Let's start off by talking about how we interact with web applications. This is the basic request response control flow. When you access a web application, the client, which is usually a web browser, sends an HTTP request to a specific URL or resource on the web server. The web server receives the HTTP request and processes it. This might involve parsing the request, determining the correct handler, and checking for any authentication or authorization. Next, the request is passed on to our application. This could be our Django application. The web server will route the request to the correct application using a web application framework, and the framework's code will handle the request, process data, communicate with database, and perform any other necessary tasks. After processing the request, the web server or application generates an HTTP response which has an HTTP status code and is sent back to the client. The response is then transmitted back to the client over the network, and the client will process this response and handle any errors if needed. And this process continues as many times as needed. Now, where does Django live? Well, Django operates on the server. Django is the application framework that is capable of handling HTTP requests, performing the right operations needed on the server side, interacting with databases if needed, and then constructing and returning a response. When you build applications using the Django framework, you use the model template view pattern. This is the same as the model view controller pattern, but since Django uses the terms model template view, those are the terms that we'll refer to in this video. Once we understand how the model template and view work together, I'll map these to the familiar model view controller components. Each component in the model template view pattern has its own responsibilities and it interacts with other components as needed. Let's start off by understanding what the model does. The model represents the data structure of the application. Models are Python classes that define the schema of the database tables and encapsulate the data access and manipulation logic in Django. Models in Django are responsible for handling all database related operations such as creating, reading, updating, and deleting records. Models provide an abstraction layer over the database that you're interacting with, and essentially, you do not have to write any raw SQL queries to deal with data. The template in Django is the view in the traditional MVC pattern. Templates are responsible for defining the presentation layer of an application. Templates are what the user sees when they interact with your application. Templates in Django contain HTML markup and placeholders for dynamic data, and these placeholders are filled up by views. This is where you define how the data should be displayed to a user. The view component in Django is similar to the controller in the MVC pattern, but there are some differences. Views are responsible for processing user requests, interacting with the model to fetch data, and then rendering the appropriate template to generate an HTTP response. Views are responsible for implementing the business logic of your application and for controlling the flow of the request response cycle. It's the view component that is responsible for interacting with both the model and the template. Views interact with the model because it retrieves data from the model. Any updates that need to be made to the model are also done via the view. The view will interact with the model to create, read, update, and delete records. The view also interacts with the template components. The user interacts with the template, and any input or update specified by the user goes through the view and then goes through to the model. The view is also responsible for rendering the right template to display the data to the user. In the model template view pattern, the model and the template do not interact directly with one another. All of the interaction is handled by the view. In this learning path, we'll be designing Django applications using the model template view pattern. Remember, Django runs on the server. The views that we create in our application will interact with the model in our application. The model, in turn, is responsible for all of our database interactions. It's the model that talks to the database. Views will use templates to render data displayed to the user. Templates will reference static files and static assets in our application, such as style sheets and images. The views in the application will expose URLs for the different pages and different actions to the client, and our client browser will be able to hit these URLs to interact with the Django application. When you build client-side web applications, the design pattern that you use is the model view controller. Django just calls it the model template view. Let's understand how the traditional model view controller maps to the model template view that Django uses. Let's talk about the model component first because they are essentially the same in traditional MVC and in Django. In traditional MVC, model represents the data and the business logic associated with data, and in Django, model represents data and handles all of the database operations in your app. In traditional MVC, views handle the presentation and user interaction logic. Views represent the GUI that you're presenting to the user. And here in Django, it's the template that does that. The template defines the presentation layer and how the data is displayed to the user. And finally, in traditional MVC, the controller is responsible for managing user input, routing requests, and coordinating between the model and the view. The controller talks to both the model and the view and handles all of the interactions between the other two components. In Django, it's the view that handles this job. The view is responsible for handling user requests, interacting with models, and rendering templates. So, all of the interaction between models and templates are handled by the view. Django is a powerful web framework and offers many features, making it easy for you to build web applications. It uses the model view controller architecture that we've discussed in some detail. This bears no repetition. Django has a powerful ORM or an object relational mapper. This ORM simplifies database interactions by allowing developers to define data models using Python classes. This abstraction reduces the need for writing raw SQL queries and mitigates common database issues. Django offers a built in admin interface that automates the creation of an admin panel for managing application data. This feature significantly speeds up the development of administrative functionality, making it easier to manage your app. Django's URL dispatcher allows developers to define URL patterns and map them to specific views. This feature makes it easy to create a clean and organized URL structure for your app. Django's template engine separates HTML markup from Python code. The use of templates make your code more readable and maintainable. Django's templates support template inheritance, filters, and tags for dynamic content rendering. Django provides a robust authentication system for handling user registrations, login, and password management. It also offers a flexible authorization system allowing developers to control user access to various parts of the app. Django has great security features as well. It offers built in protection against common vulnerabilities, including cross site scripting, cross site request forgery, and SQL injection. And finally, Django includes a comprehensive testing framework that allows developers to write unit tests and integration tests.